At 9:17 in the morning, a single missile lifted off from a launch site on the Iranian coastline, and 4 seconds later, the Spy-6 radar aboard the USS Gerald R had it on screen. One contact, a steep ballistic climb. The Aegis combat system began building an intercept solution before the missile had even cleared its first stage. To the crew, this looked routine. The strike group had shot down single ballistic threats dozens of times over the course of this war, and the tactical action officer on duty, Lieutenant Commander Hassan Ousmane, watched the new truck rise on his display without a flicker of concern. One deck below the Combat Information Center, in the Electronic Warfare Suite, Lieutenant Nicole was watching the same launch through a different set of eyes. Her passive sensors caught something the main radar picture didn't show: a narrow-band burst transmission, lasting less than a second, radiating out during the missile's boost phase and then vanishing completely. It wasn't the guidance signal. It wasn't telemetry. In 3 years of electronic warfare work, she had never once seen an Iranian missile transmit on that frequency. She didn't know yet what it meant. She wrote it down anyway. In her line of work, the signal you don't recognize is always the one that ends up mattering. She had just over 6 minutes before she'd find out exactly how much. To understand what was actually climbing off the Iranian coast that morning, you have to understand what a multiple reentry vehicle warhead does. This was not an ordinary ballistic missile. It was Iran's newest design, known as the Fatah-2, and instead of carrying a single warhead, it carried 4 independently guided re-entry vehicles bundled into one airframe that looked, on radar, exactly like every other missile the fleet had faced until the instant it reached separation altitude. At roughly 80,000 feet, an encrypted command would be sent up from a ground station on the coast. The warhead section would separate from the booster, and 4 vehicles would deploy on their own terminal guidance, each one already carrying its own targeting solution, each one diving toward the carrier from a slightly different angle at the same moment. One missile turning into 4 in a little over a second, and the fire control computer, which had spent minutes building a single clean intercept solution, would suddenly be facing 4 overlapping, nearly simultaneous vertical threats, their radar tracking cones colliding and corrupting each other's data. It was the same nightmare geometry that had nearly overwhelmed the fort once before. Except this time, the formation would have positioned interceptors for a single incoming missile, not 4. Iran had built the Fatah-2 around exactly this weakness. The 1 and a bit seconds when a single contact becomes 4 and the entire threat picture has to be rebuilt from nothing. When every interceptor already in the air is suddenly chasing empty space. At 9:19, Grant was still watching her display when the tactical circuit came alive with the standard call. Single ballistic contact, designated track 4471. Intercept Solutions building, all stations stand by. She looked again at the frequency she'd logged 2 minutes earlier. At 9:21, she got a partial match against her signal library. Not an Iranian guidance format, but a separation command protocol, the kind of encrypted trigger used to release warheads on a multiple re-entry vehicle system. She had only ever seen that signature described in classified assessments of Russian and Chinese programs. Every intelligence report she'd read said Iran was years away from fielding anything like it. Every one of those reports, it turned out, was wrong. She opened the circuit to combat at 9:21. This is Grant, Electronic Warfare. Track 4471 is carrying a multiple warhead payload. It will split into at least 4 independent re-entry vehicles at separation altitude. The separation command is coming from a ground station on a specific frequency, and the group needs to either jam that frequency before separation happens, or start assigning intercept resources for 4 targets right now. Ousmane looked at his screen. One contact, clean trajectory, a solution already building perfectly. Nothing in the intelligence picture supported a MIRV warhead. He told her the assessment was noted and asked her to stand by. She closed the circuit and looked at the track climbing through 45,000 feet, 3 minutes and 44 seconds left before separation altitude. At 9:22, she called back. She told him the frequency match was confirmed. She told him he had 3.5 minutes before 4 warheads appeared on his screen at once, and that the formation didn't have enough interceptors positioned to handle that. She told him jamming the separation signal now might stop it from happening at all. Ousmane looked at his own picture. 1 contact, a clean solution, 2 standard missile 6s already assigned and climbing exactly as designed. He told her that acting on an unconfirmed threat assessment against a track that looked completely normal wasn't something he could authorize on his own. He escalated it to Rear Admiral David Mercer. The track was now passing 53,000 feet under 3 minutes to go. Mercer looked at the same single contact. He looked at an intelligence picture that showed no confirmed Iranian MIRV capability anywhere. He looked at 2 interceptors already in flight. He told Ousmane to hold the jamming request and let the standard intercept proceed. The missile climbed through 61,000 feet, a little over 2 minutes left. Grant stopped arguing and started building. If she couldn't get anyone to jam the separation command before it fired, then she needed to be ready for what came right after. The moment 4 warheads would appear, where 2 interceptors were postured for 1. She shifted her focus to a different signal. Not the separation command, but the correction frequency the ground station would use to keep sending updated position data to the warheads throughout their descent. If she could sever that link once separation happened, the warheads would be flying blind on their last known trajectory, unable to correct for anything the carrier did afterward. She needed the ground station's exact location, and she started triangulating it from that original burst transmission. The missile passed 71,000 feet, a little over a minute to separation. At 9:24, the 2 standard missiles reached their intercept point. The track was at 79,000 feet. The first interceptor detonated 40 meters from the missile, close, remarkably close, but not close enough. The missile kept climbing, crossed 80,000 feet, and at 9:24 and 31 seconds, the separation command fired exactly on the frequency Grant had flagged 7 minutes earlier. The warhead section split away. 4 reentry vehicles deployed on independent paths. 4 separate contacts appeared on the Ford's tactical display in the same instant, and the Aegis system flagged a fire control conflict within half a second. 4 near-vertical threats, 2 interceptors already spent, and nothing positioned for the other 2. Ousmane stared at the screen for 2 seconds. Then he moved. 2 more standard missiles launched at the 2 highest priority tracks, but the geometry was already fouled, 4 overlapping radar cones interfering with each other's tracking. The first interceptor reached its target and missed outright. The warhead had made a small terminal correction, just over 2 degrees, and the missile detonated in empty air. The second interceptor came within 23 meters of its target, close enough to shear off one of the warhead's 4 control fins, destabilizing but not destroying it. That left 2 warheads fully intact, 1 damaged and wobbling, and 1 with nothing assigned to it at all. The Phalanx close-in weapon system took over as the warheads entered its range, tracking and firing at 1 target at a time, 4,500 rounds a minute at a warhead descending near Mach 8. The first burst missed as the target adjusted course. The system reacquired and fired again, and this time the rounds caught the airframe, shredding the guidance section. That warhead tumbled off its path and struck the ocean 800 meters northeast of the carrier, throwing a column of white water 200 feet into the air. 3 warheads remained, 90 seconds to impact. The Ford began an emergency turn at maximum speed, 100,000 tons of steel straining every shaft to shove the hull away from the projected impact points. And it didn't matter. Each warhead had its own terminal guidance, and each one simply corrected toward wherever the ship moved. The turn wasn't buying the carrier safety, it was handing the incoming warheads fresh targeting data. In combat, Ousmane had nothing left to fire. 3 contacts descending, 75 seconds out, every interceptor expended. Mercer picked up the all-hands circuit and gave the order, brace for impact." Grant heard the words and kept working. She had the ground station's position triangulated to within 22 meters. She had the correction frequency locked. She had a jamming signal built and ready to transmit, and she'd spent the last 90 seconds watching the pattern. Every time the carrier maneuvered, the ground station sent a correction burst and the warheads adjusted, arriving roughly every 14 seconds. The last one had come 11 seconds earlier. 3 seconds before the next one was due, she fired her jamming signal directly onto that frequency, flooding it right as the ground station tried to transmit. The correction never reached the warheads. All three committed to trajectories calculated for a carrier that by then had been running at 31 knots for a minute and a half and was no longer anywhere near where those numbers pointed. The first warhead struck the Arabian Sea 290 meters off the fort's starboard bow, sending a wall of water across the forward flight deck and shuddering the whole ship. The second hit 180 meters off the port bow less than half a second later, its shockwave slamming into a hull still reeling from the first blast, crew thrown off their feet across multiple decks, gear torn loose from its mounts, lights failing in 3 compartments from the power surge. The third warhead, the one crippled by the phalanx hit earlier, came down 55 meters off the starboard bow, close enough that the fireball was visible from the bridge, close enough that fragments from its casing struck the hull above the waterline in 7 separate places. None penetrated, the hull held, not a single direct hit. 4 sailors were treated for injuries from being thrown against bulkheads. The ship remained fully operational. For 5 seconds, nobody in combat said a word. Then Mercer opened the circuit to Grant's station. "Lieutenant, report." She looked at everything in front of her, the frequency she'd written down during boost phase, the triangulated ground station position, the jamming solution she'd built while 3 interceptors missed and the phalanx fired and the admiral ordered the ship to brace. "Sir," she said, "the ground station that guided those warheads is at these coordinates. I've had the position for 4 minutes. I recommend immediate strike authorization." Mercer studied the coordinates for 3 seconds, then keyed the strike circuit. 2 FA-18 had been flying combat air patrol at 28,000 feet above the formation since 8:30 that morning. Their targeting pods had been passively tracking the ground station's transmissions since Grant passed them the frequency at 9:22. 2 full minutes before separation, back when she'd already accepted nobody was going to jam the signal in time and had started preparing for whatever came next. At 9:31, 4 guided bombs released from 28,000 feet, GPS-guided with an error radius under 5 meters, aimed at coordinates fixed by 8 minutes of continuous triangulation. That ground station had been transmitting for 14 minutes. It had guided 4 warheads to within 55 meters of an American carrier's hull. It had 4 minutes and 11 seconds to sit with that before the first bomb arrived. The first bomb hit at 9:35. The second landed 3 seconds later. The third and fourth found the communications arrays and power systems that had been feeding correction data to the warheads throughout the entire engagement. The ground station stopped existing at 9:35, but the consequences didn't end there. Grant's jamming signal, broadcast on the precise correction frequency used by the Fatah II, had been picked up by every EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft in the theater the moment she transmitted it. 4 Growlers immediately began flooding that exact frequency across their entire operational coverage. Every Fatah II missile still in Iran's inventory that depended on ground station correction, every warhead on every launcher, everything held back for a second strike was suddenly flying blind. Iran's newest, most advanced ballistic missile, the weapon it had been saving for the moment everything else failed, had been neutralized across the entire theater by a lieutenant who caught an 0.8 of a second transmission during boost phase and wrote down a frequency nobody else had noticed. Down in the electronic warfare suite, Grant logged the engagement in 2 lines. Iran fired 1 missile that became 4. We jammed the signal that told them where we were. Iran had fired a single missile at an American carrier, and it had become 4 warheads that defeated 2 interceptors, survived a last-ditch gun engagement, and forced an admiral to order his entire crew to brace for impact. 3 of those warheads came down within 300 meters of the hull, and with nothing left in the air to stop them, they still missed, because one junior officer had noticed something strange during boost phase, written it down before anyone asked her to, and spent the next 14 minutes building a solution nobody above her had requested, while every conventional option ran dry. Would you have trusted an unconfirmed read from one officer over the entire intelligence picture, or waited for the confirmation everyone else did? By the time the last warhead had finished falling, the response was already airborne, and by the time the jamming signal reached every growler in the theater, Iran's most advanced missile had become the most expensive piece of scrap metal in the Arabian Sea. What Tehran carried away from that morning wasn't a lesson about missiles at all. It was the discovery that the most dangerous person on the most powerful carrier on Earth wasn't the admiral with his hand over the strike order. It was the lieutenant who wrote down the frequency nobody else thought mattered.